welcome to Free Science Fiction Stories. Today's story is Revenants Due, a heart-stopping tale of a team that must navigate unstable, waterlogged sections of a post-apocalyptic facility while outwitting both human and alien enemies. Revenants Due.
The wind howled through the skeletal remains of the old industrial district, rattling rusted chain-link fences and sending scraps of debris skittering across cracked pavement. Ezra adjusted the straps on his pack, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. The blackened husk of the Solace Medical Research Facility loomed in the distance, half swallowed by the creeping grasp of nature. Vines coiled around shattered windows, trees burst through collapsed sections of the roof, and the broken remains of its once pristine white walls were now streaked with rust and decay. It had been years since the facility had been abandoned. First, when the world above still clung to life, it had been a hub for pandemic response and pharmaceutical development. Then the wars came, and the collapse followed. Ezra had been a young man when everything fell apart, barely old enough to remember when places like this had meant something. Now it was just another ruin in a dead world. He glanced over his shoulder at the rest of his team. Mira was checking the readings on her oxygen tank and checked the reinforced seals of her respirator. Everyone wore biohazard suits. They were hot and bulky sometimes, but you never could tell what kinds of dangers lurked in the ruins. "The ciprofloxacin will be in the vault," Mira answered, double-checking the flare gun and shotgun slung across her back. "The facility had long-term storage. If the seals are intact, we might have hit the jackpot." Might being the key word. Jace exhaled sharply, rolling his bad shoulder. Ezra's jaw tightened. He didn't need to be reminded of the potential dangers of the expedition, or the price of failure. Their settlement, Creston, was barely holding together. An outbreak of bacterial infections had swept through the camp, and their stockpile of antibiotics had been dwindling for months. Without the medicine, people would start dying within the week. This place was a gamble, but it was the only shot they had. The closer they got to the facility, the worse the decay became. The front entrance was a twisted wreck, collapsed inward. Blast craters from some old bombing run made them weave around the pitted ground as they approached the building. They had spent a day or so checking out the area, looking for the easiest way in. There wasn't much chance they'd get in and out unnoticed, but they wanted to delay discovery for as long as possible. Mira spotted an alternate entrance through a loading dock, where heavy steel doors remained intact but partially ajar. The smell of stagnant water and mildew clung to the air, thick and oppressive. They entered silently. Inside, the darkness swallowed them. Their flashlights cut through the gloom, revealing rows of overturned gurneys, shattered glass, and rusted medical carts left to decay. Signs of past looters were everywhere. Transpacked shelves, spent shell casings, old bloodstains faded to brown. "This place is huge," Owen muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Stay close." "Stay quiet," Ezra said. Mira pulled up an old blueprint on her handheld scanner, the faint glow illuminating her face. "Storage vault is 2 floors up. Looks like—" She stopped abruptly, her brow furrowing. "What?" Mira turned the screen toward them. "Heat signatures! Someone's here!" Jace tensed, lifting his rifle. "How many?" 5, maybe more, moving on the east wing. Ezra didn't need to ask who they were. The Revenants. They had heard the rumors. A gang that had claimed the ruins of Solace as their own, killing anyone who trespassed. They'd had some dealing with them in the past, none of them good. That gang liked to claim all of the medicine they could, and had already wiped out most of the supplies from the rest of the city. It was because of them that Jace never made a full recovery after their last mission together. There just wasn't enough to go around. If the Revenants had already been through the storage vaults, there might not be anything left. But if they hadn't— "We stick to the west side," Ezra decided. "Stay out of sight." They moved deeper into the facility, weaving between rusted machinery and overturned filing cabinets. The air was thick with decay, but beneath it, something else. a faint chemical scent that clung to the back of their throats. Mira knelt near a partially stripped security panel, running her gloved fingers along the exposed wiring. This wasn't scavengers. This was precision work. Someone disabled this system deliberately. You know what that means. Jace shifted uncomfortably. Could have been the Revenants. Maybe, Ezra said, but something felt wrong. Further down the hall, deep score marks gouged through the metal walls. They made strange patterns, inhuman. Owen hesitated, reaching out to trace the grooves. What the? Don't touch it! Ezra grabbed his wrist and pulled him back. He had seen marks like these before, months ago in a different ruin, but those had been further south. Not here. A sudden metallic creak echoed through the corridor. The team froze. Jace aimed his rifle toward the noise, scanning the shadows. The silence stretched, thick with tension. Then, a faint, distant whistling. Owen's breath hitched. Did you hear? No, Ezra cut in sharply. You didn't. They moved on, faster now, but Ezra felt it in his gut. This was not just the Revenants. The storage floor was deathly quiet, the air thick with the scent of stale disinfectant and old rot. Ezra and his team moved cautiously, their footsteps muffled against the dust-caked tile floor. The door to the supply vault stood before them, a massive steel slab embedded into the wall, its reinforced surface covered in peeling hazard signs. The biometric panel beside it was long dead, its screen dark, but that didn't mean the security system wasn't still active. Mira knelt beside the panel, her fingers working fast as she pulled out a battered toolkit. She traced the rusted edges of the vault's locking mechanism, muttering under her breath as she studied the old wiring. If the fire suppression system held, the CO2 should have kept the antibiotics from breaking down, she murmured. But if the system is still running, that means security protocols are too, Ezra finished grimly. Jay stood at the entrance to the corridor, his rifle shouldered, scanning the empty hall for movement. Owen had disappeared into the collapsed sections of the storage wing, looking for anything else worth taking. I hope there's some potassium iodide around here. We always need more of that. We don't have time for this, Jace grunted, flexing his good arm. If the Revenants know we're here, they'll be on us soon. Mira didn't look up. Well, unless you'd rather I blow the thing open, I suggest you let me work. Ezra turned, his instincts prickling. The air felt wrong, too still, as if the walls themselves were listening. He opened his mouth to call for Owen when a muffled grunt echoed down the hall. Owen spun toward the sound just as something slammed against the wall, rattling the loose panels. Ezra caught a flash of movement, a pair of arms dragging a struggling figure into the shadows. Jace. No! Owen bolted forward, Ezra close behind, but by the time they reached the next corridor, Jace was gone. They found him in the next room, pinned to the ground, a knife pressed against his throat. A Revenant. The man wore scavenged armor, his face wrapped in a tattered red scarf. Others stood behind him, 6, maybe more, all armed, all watching with cold amusement. At their center, a woman with cropped black hair and a scar face leveled a pistol at Ezra's chest. "Put the guns down," she said. Her voice was calm, almost bored, but her eyes were hard as iron. Ezra kept his rifle steady. "I don't think so," the woman smirked. "You broke into our home. This place was abandoned," Ezra replied. "Not anymore." She motioned toward the vault door behind them. "We couldn't crack it, but looks like you have someone who can." Ezra's stomach sank. They had been waiting. "We need the medicine," he said carefully. "There's enough in there for all of us." The woman tilted her head. "And what makes you think we're willing to share?" Ezra didn't get a chance to answer. The whistling started. It came from the vents, from the collapsed halls, from the darkened corridors beyond their flashlights. Not one voice, but many. A Revenant near the door stiffened, his hand tightening on his rifle. What was that? Something moved in the shadows, just beyond the flickering lights. A Revenant raised his gun. Too late. A whistler descended from the ceiling, landing on his shoulders with a sickening crunch. He barely had time to scream before the creature's claws ripped through his torso, splitting armor and bone. Gunfire erupted. The Revenants panicked, firing wildly, their shots tearing through the air as more whistlers emerged from the dark. Ezra grabbed Jason, pulled him back as one of the creatures skittered down the hall, moving inhumanly fast, its pyramid-shaped head swiveling toward them. "Fall back!" Ezra shouted, shoving Jace back out into the hall toward the vault. The Revenants scattered, some running, others fighting, but the whistlers were too fast, too precise. They darted through the gunfire, their movements erratic yet calculated, their eyes tracking every step. Ezra shoved Mira toward the console. "Open the vault, now!" "I need more time." The whistlers tore into the Revenants. One woman was lifted off the ground, her screams cut short as a claw punched through her ribs. Another fighter went down with his throat torn open. Mira bypassed the last failsafe. The vault hissed as the doors began to cycle open. Ezra grabbed Jace's arm, dragging him toward the entrance. "Move, move." The vault doors fully retracted, revealing stacks of sealed medical crates, untouched, preserved in the sterile containment field. Owen sprinted inside. Mira and Jace followed, his injured arm hanging uselessly at his side. Ezra was the last through. Behind them the Revenants were dying. The leader, the woman with the scar, staggered back, her gun empty. A whistler lunged for her, its claws slicing deep into her shoulder. She collapsed. Ezra hit the emergency override. The vault doors slammed shut, sealing them inside. For a long moment there were only the cries of the dying. Then, outside, the screams faded. Jace exhaled sharply, his face pale. "They're dead." Ezra shook his head. "Not all of them." Mira pressed her back against the wall, her breathing ragged. "We can't stay here. That vault door won't hold them forever." Ezra turned to the secondary exit at the far end of the vault. The corridor beyond led to the flooded lower levels. "No choice," he said. "We go down." Mira cursed under her breath. Owen swallowed hard, gripping his rifle with shaking hands. Jace just nodded. Ezra hit the door controls. The locks released with a heavy thunk, and the vault's back entrance swung open, revealing a long staircase spiraling down into the dark. At the bottom was a black tunnel leading into waist-high water. The air was thick with mildew, and the silence was absolute. Ezra stepped inside first, his boots splashing softly. The others followed. Somewhere behind them the whistling started again. Ezra barely had time to breathe. The walls of the ruined facility trembled with distant impacts as the whistlers stalked the corridors, their low, eerie whistles reverberating through the crumbling structure. The few remaining Revenants had regrouped, their desperation turning to pure rage. They weren't running, they were making a last stand. "Keep moving," Ezra commanded, pushing Owen through the chill water as Jace slapped a fresh magazine into a pistol he took off a dead Revenant during the initial battle. The waterlogged floor beneath them was littered with floating debris. Some were human shapes, face down in the water, their makeshift armor torn apart by whistler claws. From the other end of the corridor, a Revenant with a ragged coat and a blood-streaked face leveled his shotgun. "You think we're just going to let you walk out of here?" His voice rasped. "This place is ours." "We don't have time for this," Mira hissed, eyes flicking toward the approaching shadows at the far end of the hall. Silhouettes shifted in the dim emergency lighting, limbs moving with lightning speed. The whistlers were coming. Jace stepped forward, his ruined arm hanging uselessly at his side, but his remaining hand gripping his pistol with steady purpose. "You idiots don't get it. We're all dead if we stay here." The Revenants didn't waver. Ezra clenched his jaw. Fine. If they wanted to fight, they'd get one. Before another word could be spoken, Mira shot a flare into a smoke detector. The facility hissed in response as the emergency CO2 fire suppression activated, filling the corridors with a thick, choking mist. The lights flickered as automated systems dumped inert gas into the air, displacing every breath of oxygen. The Revenants recoiled first. One of them clutched his throat, coughing violently as his lungs fought against the sudden lack of breathable air. Another staggered, his weapon slipping from his fingers. The whistlers, however, didn't stop. They moved through the white fog with perfect clarity, their glistening eyes flickering like distant embers in the gloom. They didn't breathe. This wasn't a barrier to them. The first Revenant collapsed, choking. The second managed a single, strangled scream before something ripped him backwards into the haze. The scavengers ran. They sprinted through collapsed corridors, past fallen ceiling panels. The loading bay was ahead, the only way out. "Go, go!" Ezra roared as the air thickened with the sound of claws scraping against metal. The whistlers followed, fast, unrelenting. They had finished the last of the Revenants. The team hit the bay doors at full speed. Mira reached the control panel first, hammering the override. The doors hissed as they fought against rusted servos, groaning open by inches. "Not stopping now," Jace growled, forcing his body forward despite his injury. Ezra twisted back just in time to see a whistler lunge, its pyramid-shaped head tilting as it struck. It missed him by a fraction. Instead, Owen took the hit. The impact sent the younger scavenger sprawling, his body smashing against the submerged floor. His rifle was gone, lost beneath the water. "Owen!" Mira shouted. Ezra had seen these things killed before, fast, precise, efficient. Owen had seconds. Instinct overrode thought. Ezra tore his knife from his belt and lunged, driving the serrated edge between the creature's plates. The blade sank deep, meeting a sudden wet resistance as a burst of blue-green fluid spattered across the water's surface. The whistler shrieked, its body convulsing. "Owen, get up!" Ezra growled. Owen sucked in a ragged breath and drove his boot into the whistler's head, forcing it back. The creature lost its balance, slipping into the deeper waters beyond. It flailed for purchase, its three elongated arms thrashed in the water. Jace leveled his pistol and emptied the magazine into its head. Its limbs convulsed. They ran. The tunnels sloped upward, the water thinning as they reached the outer edge of the facility's ruins. They staggered onto dry ground, breathless, soaked, and carrying the last packs of ciprofloxacin they had managed to grab. Their battered vehicle could be seen in the distance, a beacon of hope in the darkness. Ezra counted heads. Jace, Mira, Owen. He was bloodied but alive. They were all here. Barely. Jace exhaled, dropping onto the damp pavement. "We made it." Mira wiped the water from her face, her hands shaking from adrenaline. "They're dead, the Revenants." Ezra wasn't so sure. Something didn't sit right. He turned back toward the ruined research center, the silence pressing against his ears. The place was a graveyard now, a hollowed-out corpse. Somewhere in the distance, beyond the crumbling walls, past the wreckage, past the waterlogged tunnels and the blood-stained halls, he swore he still heard it. That sound. Ezra's hands curled into fists. "Let's get out of here." The team climbed into their vehicle, the old engine groaning to life. The wheels crunched over broken asphalt, carrying them away from the ruins, away from the dead, away from whatever they had left behind. The radio crackled, static. For a moment Ezra thought nothing of it, just interference. But then, beneath the static, barely perceptible, a low, melodic whistle. The blood drained from his face. No one spoke. No one moved. The transmission cut out. The vehicle kept rolling into the night.
Enjoy this story? Subscribe to Free Science Fiction Stories for daily sci-fi adventures.